This is Jason Verney's podcast. I am Jason Verney. In this episode, I want to talk about the film A Ghost Story. This film is by David Lowery, and I've been wanting to record this episode for some time regarding this film because it really stands out, this film. It's very difficult to describe. I had to go and see it a second time, as I do with other films as well, but I really wanted to capture it, not only just because of the style and how different it was, but also kind of the music and certain aspects. For example, I was so into the film itself, so into how the film was displayed, that ironically I missed, or I wasn't even thinking about a particular factor that people were talking about, which was the framing. The framing of this film. It's very unique on the screen. It's very, it obviously wasn't as visible to me, or it was forgettable to me because I was so immersed in the film itself. So let's go into the film itself and discuss a little bit about the certain aspects that really shone out to me, and basically that made this film so unique. First of all, it's very, as I've mentioned briefly before, it's difficult to define this type of film, even the genre. I mean, even the fact that it's called a ghost story, it's not your traditional ghost story. And so much so that it could almost be seen as art house in many ways throughout the film. I mean, we have the many lingering shots in the film itself, which it wasn't doing it for the sake of art. Many films do. They have the lingering shots, and I often feel, depending on the film and how it's played out, they do it in such a way that sometimes you feel like it's trying to be something. It's not necessarily, it's just the way that they're directing it. But in this film, especially at the beginning, it feels very arty, and in a good way. And I'm not in any way putting down the films that do it for the sake of art, because they are artists. All filmmakers are, the respectable filmmakers are artists. But every time there was a lingering shot, especially at the beginning of this film, in the early stages, it's actually giving you time to think, or it's you as the audience waiting for action, or are you, was I waiting for emotion, or something which would ultimately come? It didn't really matter. Those shots were there to kind of make you think. And one early scene, I won't go into the story too much of how this particular scene comes about, because I really don't want to be a spoiler podcast. There's a long scene of our central character, the female. She's eating pie, not like the pies we have in UK, sort of a little tiny pie or apple pie. These are the sort of, I suppose you could say, the standard American pies. People talk about, apple pie, pumpkin pie. But the scene is so long. I mean, she eats pretty much this whole pie herself. She's mourning, she's upset. But it really emphasizes what we do as humans when we are down, when we lose someone, or when we want to escape or just forget something. I mean, she has no choice in this particular moment but to eat and eat and eat. And it's emotional, it's really, at first you're thinking, oh God, what's happening? I mean, we know what's happened, and we know what's brought this on. But the fact that we're watching it, it's not mundane. The fact that she's eating this pie, this is real as well. There's no fakery, there's no trickery. This is why this film it just felt so different, so unique. And then we have later on in the film. This is just to point out a few aspects that I found quite unique to this particular film. There's a Spanish or South American sort of dwellers in the house that we see. The house being an integral part to this film. There's the couple that we're introduced to at the beginning. The house that they live in. We later on see this house throughout the ages, if you like. Different people residing in this house, dwelling in this house, and particular South American or Spanish. Apologies if I'm not getting this right. They're there, but intentionally or unintentionally. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. There's there's no subtitles when these people are speaking, and it gave it that naturalistic look. But another part later on, there's intentionally or unintentionally funny subtitles between, well, let's just say two ghosts. So you can read that into that what you like, but it was kind of, there's this great moment where this ghost is looking out of a window. It sees another ghost, and there is this interaction between them where these subtitles come up, and it's kind of it really. Some people were laughing in that moment, some people weren't, but it was quite touching. And even though, as I've mentioned before, this film itself was, it's not your traditional ghost story, and I'm glad it's not. That's been done 100 times. It did make me jump in two particular moments. I mean, I think the first time was the thud of hands on a window, and then some diggers with construction. Again, not the expected jump you would get in a horror film. These were just jumps to me personally, but that just shows you how much of a horror film or ghost film it isn't. I did like to think that these diggers, and even later on in the film, 2/3 of the way through, perhaps 3/4 of the way through, we're shown that house, the house that we're kind of living through, becomes skyscrapers. And I did wonder if this was a good statement or a statement about the big corporations taking houses, taking living spaces, which is happening everywhere in the world. Whether it was, this could be just this film reviewer's bizarre way of looking at certain films. But this is a ghost story, as I said. But it really is the ghost that we see. It's their story. You could say the title could be not a ghost story, a particular ghost story, because using the word plural, I mean it's a particular ghost's story, but it tells you something throughout, because we're sticking with this building, this same house, this same home, which then becomes other things. It shows you how that ghosts are, they're not necessarily, they're meant to haunt. They're meant to haunt a particular place. They're meant to, appear on the scene. And this shows you that even after somebody's lifetime has gone, or somebody has left that house, the ghosts are still there, and they're perhaps visiting other people. I have to say at this point, the music. This is something I was going to touch on this first in this podcast episode, because the music is amazing. It's strange. It's orchestral. It's deep. It's emotional. The music itself is, most of it is by Daniel Hart. He has a band called Dark Rooms, and Daniel Hart, most of the tracks in this, I think all bar one or all bar two of them, if you include the Dark Rooms one, They're all by him, and they're amazing. But one of the songs, which is by Dark Rooms, his band, is very integral to the film. It comes up 2 or 3 different times throughout the film. It's very I've used that word before too many times, perhaps. It's very. It does pull at you because the song itself is heard during this couple's life at the very beginning of this film. He's showing her this film. He's a musician, by the way. The out of the couple, the guy is the musician, and you do wonder if he's focusing too much on his music life and he's not listening to her or whatever. But he plays this song to her, and she takes it all in through headphones. I will say now as well, actually, that when I was quite wrapped up in this film, and I really wanted to catch it a second time, and I ultimately did. And I'll go on to what I sort of noticed in the second viewing of this film. I will say that he was actually in London in one of the venues in Hoxton, and I very almost went to see him play, I believe, with his band, or I don't think he was alone. I can't remember if it was Dark Rooms or Daniel Hart, but either way, he was in London performing, and I was so tempted. I can't remember why I didn't go now, but there was a reason for it. But the brilliant music score by mostly Daniel Hart it's just amazing. And not only that, you have the strings, as I say, the very orchestral, but also the instrument of a piano. If it's not heard as much in the soundtrack itself, it's more minimal. It's more minimal, yeah, more minimal. But it's maybe it's not heard so much, but it's the prop of a piano in the film is featured heavily, and it's an important one for the story, as indeed are notes. And I don't mean musical notes, or they could be, but little notes or pieces of paper that are every now and again, where I guess the idea is alluded to that these are taken out of the wall or being left in a wall, perhaps by a ghost. As I say, I'm deliberately keeping this vague because I don't want to give away too much of this. So yeah, it's overpowering. The music itself is, whether it's dramatic, eerie, and that's quite significant. It's eerie, but it's not scary eerie. It's just eerie, and it's overpowering in a good way from the very beginning of the film. I mean, people, especially when this film was out, people were talking a lot about how the music in Dunkirk was, it's kind of played a part in the film itself, really overpowered it, or not overpowered it, so that it really pushed it along. And even The Handmaid, and although I have to agree, the music in The Handmaid is pretty amazing. If you listen to that alone, it is good from my point of view. But this is very. The music is sublime. I would check out, even if you check out the soundtrack album before you see the film. Either way, you'll see what I mean. And going back to that scene where he's trying to play this, he's playing this song to his other half at the time. It's through headphones, and later on, there's a scene where he's no longer in her life as such. The same song or a rendition of it is heard through earphones, and it's kind of, you can almost say that being later on in the film, they're smaller, they're earphones as opposed to headphones. Maybe because she's lost him, maybe because he's more distant, maybe he's a smaller part of her now. Although significantly, the memories she has must be, or us as the audience feel like we've got more emotion now, even though she's listening through earphones as opposed to headphones at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, this review is defying structure. Perhaps I'm trying to do what the film does. The film defies, it defies structures. I mean, I would have been happy if the film left the story or the situation anywhere. I mean, when it ended, I would have been happy either way, because the film just played I wouldn't care how it ended in it was such an intriguing film, an intriguing bit of filmmaking. As I mentioned, it does that. This starts off with the couple. Then we go through the house. The house is met with different dwellers, different residents throughout the years, or they become the homeowners or the home livers. I don't know if they're renting or or buying it. But we see various families, as I mentioned before, the foreign families and the single people. And talking of single people, there's a really kind of, I'm not sure what I thought of it, but it definitely worked. Talking of single people, there's one person doing a monologue at a party, which is pretty astounding, even if you just take the fact that of the monologue itself is probably someone trying to be philosophical, but because it's kind of just a talk, and people are maybe listening, they're not. Is a party going on? You have to admire it just for the courage of putting that monologue in that scene, in that film even. As I say, I wouldn't really mind where this film, how it ended, if it ended suddenly like lots of films do these days. I mean, either way, you really don't know where this story is going. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing in my opinion. And even when you subconsciously, or when you unconsciously try to guess or second guess, the film suddenly proves you wrong. That was kind of my summarising of the film, mostly after I'd seen it the first time. So when I went to see the film a second time, similar things came up, but I was looking out for the framing, because I perhaps didn't catch it the first time around. Perhaps it's the curved edge, the squared off world I live in, or we live in, that framing, which is essentially like that. Think of an Instagram photo or a squared off photo, rounded at the edges. There is a name for it. Apologies, but perhaps that's meant to represent, the rounded, the sort of squared off life we live in. And I think maybe that was what he was trying to do, but at the same time I'm probably way off the mark there. It's just my bizarre mind again. But talking about the framing, there's a morgue scene, which you can probably guess where that scene comes. As I mentioned, the couple at the beginning, she does actually say something in the beginning of the film to her other half, who eventually is no longer with us. She does say something about notes, which I'd missed her at the first time around. She talks about notes being left in a wall, which becomes obvious later on in the film. So perhaps I hadn't caught that the first time around. I wasn't taking it in. But talking about this morgue scene that I just mentioned, that also feels like it has sort of squared off edges, or maybe that's how it appeared. Now, the reason I'm saying that, I don't know if this was talking about ghosts. I don't know if this was an apparition of my own. It was very. How can I say? We were outside the morgue, or outside where this body was. We're looking in, and the clever kind of bookending of the slow and still shot, because it was a very slow but almost still shot, moving backwards, I believe. It almost felt like those, as we were backing up, those borders were a frame themselves. In other words, the side of the room and the doorway, it didn't need a frame. That was the frame. I hope that made sense. But yeah, all these shots, all these great shots, all these weird and wonderful shots, they keep you guessing. But it's never boring. The film is never really testing your patience. It was any of these slow shots or slow panning in and out. It keeps you intrigued and not bored, not at all bored. Well, I wasn't anyway. let me just think about those shots. There was something else that came to me about these shots. There's a shot. On camera, they're in one another's arms, and perhaps that shot is for another reason. Perhaps this shot is to show that this could actually be their last moment together in the current life. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say, sorry about this, there's a shot with them together, but the shot itself, as I say, slow shot, it could be to make you dwell on the fact that this is going to be their last time together before one of them disappears, as I mentioned before, and that's the guy who disappears. Now, just to retouch on the earphones bit that I mentioned earlier on, this, as I say, even though these earphones are smaller than the headphones, it's more powerful to her. It's perhaps more powerful to us, the audience, because now we are reliving what we knew before, what we'd seen before at the start of the film. So even though the earphones are smaller, as I mentioned before, than the headphones, that said, they're right in the ear. So of course the experience is more intense for her and for us, the audience. So yeah, I mean, overall, I'm sorry if this has been a bit sort of all over the place, but I'm trying to do this spoiler-free, this particular film. It's really difficult. I want people to enjoy this. If you get a chance to see it on iTunes, or if it's going to be on Netflix, or even in the cinema, it'd be a chance to hopefully for you to see it. But it's if people were sold to see this film as a ghost story, then they might be mistaken. I mean, they might be upset if they're not into this kind of film. I mean, I think the director took a real risk, even if the marketing was pretty good. Well, I'm guessing it was. I mean, I just remember seeing once at the Picture House Central in Shaftesbury Avenue, this model of a ghost, and I thought to myself, well, not another ghost story. I actually thought like a teen ghost story. I'd heard a bit about this film, and I heard that it was a little bit special. And I thought, well, he's obviously put a lot of money into this, marketing and the materials used, and he must have taken a risk, even with all that, because you're telling people this is a ghost story. This is perhaps what you've seen before, because that's what sometimes people want, is something they've seen before. Of course, test screenings aside, I mean, they must have got an indication from that. Interestingly enough, this film was mostly filmed, I believe it was shot mostly in secret. And as I say, I'm just wondering how many sort of interested audience were kind of duped into seeing a slightly more artistic film than they anticipated. I mean, I don't have sympathy too much. Well, I have a little bit of sympathy for the audience, because I'm the audience. I'm the same as everyone else. But one thing I did think about was, that marketing, the money that went into that marketing probably wasn't too difficult. I'm no expert in, I can't even say the word right, I said export. In producing as such, I mean, I do produce small films and short films, documentaries, etc. But this is a guy who worked at Disney on Pete's Dragon, and as much as if I'd known that first, that might have put me off. But I'm sure he had some gusto, some money to get this out there, to get people to see it. So thinking back to those models I saw, for example, in the Picture House Central, where that's probably not that surprising, even though it gave nothing away about the film, which was brilliant. I've just put a ghost somewhere, a model ghost, instead of a big poster or both. It does wonders. There's a bit in the film as well. I just remember this. There's a part where one ghost is staring at basically at no other ghost. Like there was a ghost originally at this other house opposite, because this is meant to say, I suppose, that these ghosts, they inhabit a certain house and that's where they stay. Doesn't matter what happens. Even when the building gets knocked down and put up again, this is where these ghosts will kind of stay. But there's one bit where the ghost is staring at no opposite ghost. Nothing there. Well, there probably was just before. I don't want to give this away. When he's in a new, maybe conglomerate building, I don't know. And I did think to myself that maybe this was to represent how... I don't know, this is just my weird way of looking at it. Maybe this was just to make... maybe it is to show how capitalism has made him really lonely, or the modern world has. Maybe that was a representation of what's really happened. You know, he's just this ghost standing, and even opposite him there's no ghost now, because finally that ghost just disappeared. For whatever reason, it's no longer there. Perhaps because he wasn't remembered anymore. I'm not entirely sure, or even if I was, I wasn't. I don't want to give it away, as I keep saying. And as I keep mentioning, this ghost relationship is, you know, it's with this house, it's with this woman, it's with this past. You know, one house, one woman, one past. That's it. That's almost what this one ghost represents. And as I mentioned before, all this eeriness, all this greyness, this music, and everything that makes up this brilliant film. It's such an original film all the way through, from the beginning, you know, through where you don't know where it's taking you, and it's original right up to the credits and the audio. You know, it's just really. I'm probably overpraising this now, but if you see this film, hopefully you'd feel the same. One thing on my second screening, have to mention this. You know, what did I hear at the start of the film? People were starting on popcorn, which, yeah, I'm not saying I've never had popcorn in the cinema. It was so quiet. It's such a quiet film at the beginning, and all I heard was sort of grazing. You know, people. I wish people should try. You know, they should try, especially this kind of film. At least just be quiet in those quiet moments. Try gazing, not grazing, instead of gracing us with, you know, your teeth full of braces or not. I don't know. Sorry, my attempt at rhyming there. But from gazing and grazing to blazing fires, you know, from a dragon, Pete's dragon, as I mentioned before. That was David Lowery's previous film. He's quite a few other films, documentaries as well, and short films. But it couldn't be any more different to Pete's Dragon. I didn't see Pete's Dragon, but I just know from the trailers that that's not the kind of film this was. And as I say, this particular film was filmed in secret, and I could see probably why, because they wanted to go off and do this and then show the studios afterwards, this is what we've done, and even go to a different studio to do it. I'm not sure the full ins and outs there. I have watched a few interviews with him. But I'm sure this is, you know, when someone has something, this is perhaps a labour of love. You know, when you make a big commercial film, or a big for a big commercial studio, even if it's a flop, you then get the finance to go off and make what you want, to a degree, and that's what he's done. He's made his labour of love, labour of love, or labour of lost love, in probably more representative. Bear in mind what this film's about. And by that logic, I mean, one thing I was reading up on was that his next film, or one of his future films, he's got a couple of planned, I believe, according to IMDb, is Peter Pan. So again, that's going to be something quite major. So I can only hope that there'll be another gem like a ghost story. But I do think that this is one tale that I hope, you know, is still going to be unique. Whatever he comes up with, this will stay unique in everything that it has. The style, the audacity, the score, the lack of words. You know, there's minimal words in this story, in this film, and the story it has everything, and it's for people and for ghosts everywhere, in my opinion. But yeah, and like I said before, it's not just it's a particular ghost story. It's a ghost story, but it's more like a particular ghost's story as opposed to a ghost story. But either way, either one works. I'm sure I've missed some things there, but this film, as I say, it's, to summarise, there's a I don't want to give too much away, but there's a couple. It's really, even the story itself doesn't, even if I went into the story, it really doesn't take away the surprise. The surprise element is kind of what makes the film, but also the movingness of it all. What's happening is this ghost, this guy coming back into life, and the film kind of goes all full circle. And again, I don't want to dwell on it too much, and give too much away. But although we move through this building that so much happens to, I've already mentioned construction, and then there's a bit where, for whatever reason, we are back prior to the time the house had this couple in it. That's all I'm going to say on that. But it's just, there's that's why the film could really, for me, could have stopped anywhere. It could have ended just as bizarrely or eerily as it was eerie as a whole. So, yeah, I've done this podcast because I've been meaning to do this for ages, and ever since I saw the film, I'd made so many notes on this, and I really wanted to put this out there because in this, even when I was reading this, reading the notes before I did this broadcast, I was still thinking of other things, but it was kind of a lot of them tied into what I'd spoken about. What I was going to speak about anyway. So, yeah, I would check that out if you can. If you haven't already, if you're one of the lucky few, well, lucky many that have seen a ghost story, then you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm going to at some point own this, whether it's on iTunes or it'd probably be iTunes. That's where I get stuff from. But yeah, it's a memorable film. This film last year in 2017, Tony Erdmann, another film that I really liked, and for different reasons, of course. Those two films, and there's Moonlight and some other big films, this one is kind of, it just keeps coming back to me. I keep remembering it, and there's the soundtrack, listening to that is beautiful. So I will leave it at that. That was a review, or probably a breakdown of A Ghost Story and my observations relating to it. Okay, so until next time, I will say adios and keep well. Bye.